Hello and welcome to the second ever public show and tell from GDS, that's the Government Digital Service. So hopefully you will have found the link by now, and there's thousands of people joined us around the world. And just by a show of hands, I'd like you to email us and let us know where you're dialing in from, and then recap at the end so we can see where people are dialed in from around the world. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Lou Down, Head of Design for the UK Government, and I'll be your host today. I'm Harry, I'm a service designer from the Government Digital Service. Please give a very warm welcome to Lou Down.
Thank you. Cool. Hi. Hello, everyone. And welcome again to the second ever live show and tell that we've done at GDS, which is very exciting. There is an email address, as Harry said, to email questions to us. We will be reading them out after each of the presentations, so we'll do our best to answer them. There'll be a kind of 90-minute session today, and we'll have about 8 talks, which is very exciting. And the overall theme that we'll be working on today is essentially making it better, making it easier to make services better across government, which is really what we work on here, is making it easier for the rest of government, for all of you watching, to make better services in government. And the theme really throughout all of the talks will be around scale and sustainability, and that will keep coming up again and again. And the reason being that we are facing a critical moment in service delivery in government. We are about to face probably the biggest kind of political change in certainly most of our lifetimes. We have faced kind of significant budget changes in the last 5 to 10 years. And all of that poses a real challenge to the way that we're delivering services in government right now. And we're doing that in the context of being both the oldest and the largest service provider in the UK, which is not without its challenges. And I'm not going to go on about this because those of you who've seen my earlier talk introducing Services Week can go and have a look at that, where I talk a little bit more about the history of government services. But, you know, we're doing this also in a context where the world is changing rapidly, not just the political environment that we're operating in, but the social environment, the technological environment is changing really, really quickly. But in good news, and hopefully some of you will have seen some of the presentations that have been happening throughout the week this week as part of Services Week, presentations, workshops, training, various other things. And I think it's safe to say that we are now delivering better services than we ever have done before. Even in that environment, we're starting to deliver across every channel. We're starting to deliver services that are agnostic to government structures. And we're starting to really tackle that problem, that very old problem of how do we join up internal and external kind of processes, not just designing the front end of services, but also the back end and how they work really within our organizations. So when we talk about scale and sustainability here, to the work that we're doing to help the rest of government deliver better services, we're really talking about kind of meeting demand. So, you know, obviously there's a huge demand at the moment for very quick and very rapid service change. We're also looking at how we can get better ourselves at delivering what we do as a service, because, you know, if we're encouraging the rest of government to deliver better services, very important that we deliver our service to government as a service that can be used well as well. So when we're talking about sustainability as well, we're talking about not just doing it ourselves, but also helping the rest of government to do it more easily themselves. So helping the rest of government to work more independently away from us with standards and toolkits and various other things to help that to happen more easily. So today's agenda is very exciting. You're going to be hearing from these teams, and then we're going to do a bit of a closing remarks at the end. And just quickly, you know, to talk about the successes of Services Week. Services Week, which this show and tell is part of, has been, I think, an amazing kind of thing to happen. It's the first Services Week we've ever had. And really the idea behind it is to talk about government as a service provider, to spread that knowledge and that awareness of the fact that we are first and foremost a service provider to people, and that is our job. And Services Week has been a cross-government kind of activity right down the country with departments all across the UK. And it's been sort of self-supported, self-organized, and really a kind of collection of events and talks and a number of other things. So we've had them in these sorts of locations, which has been very exciting. And a lot of those has been live streamed as well. As I said, we've had workshops, we've had training. We just had, in fact, we are still having, I can see in the background, some introduction to service design training here at GDS right now. We're having show and tells, this being one of them. We've had case study presentations from right across government. It's been really exciting work shown as part of that. And we've also done kind of remote clinics, Q&As, and produced a number of blog posts and meetups. So that's been a lot of stuff that we've done this year. We're excited about doing it again next year. And if you have ideas of the way that we can improve that, please just email the email address that I shared at the beginning, when we'll also be publishing a recap of the week later on next week. So yeah, look after that. And I'm going to stop talking because we're going to get to the most important bit, which is talking about what the teams have been up to. So first up is GDS collaboration across government, which I think is Will.
Hey, it's Harry again. I want to talk a little bit about the work we've been doing collaborating with teams all across government. So I work in a small team of service signers working with other government organisations. I want to talk a little bit about why we're all here. So as Lee mentioned, we're here to help government design better services for users, and users is the word. Nobody chooses to interact with government, so they're not giving us their custom. They're interacting with government because they have to, and that's why I'm here. That's why I enjoy working with all of you so much. But why does government want to pay for us designers to be here? 80% of government spend is on services, and of that, 60% is spent on caseworking. So it's quite a substantial amount of spending that could be spent on frontline staff delivering public services. And ServiceLine has a role to play in this. So some might call these kind of systemic changes digital transformation, but let's call a spade a spade. It's doing more with less. But what does that actually look like? It's going from this, so stacks of shelves with lots of filing on, thank you Ben for the photo, to this, empty shelves. And that's kind of one kind of quite sad, bleak aspect of looking at the sort of digitalization of various services. And these photos were taken at Companies House, where they've been working tirelessly to improve their public services. So things like registering a business, filing accounts online, and that sort of thing. And today, many business owners and their accountants no longer send in their accounts and forms on paper, and they choose to do this online. Of course, we should always retain that ability to do this via paper, but many people prefer to do that using these new services. And that makes it much easier for users and much more cost-effective for government to run these services. And GDS have been supporting Companies House to make it even easier for users to find and use these services. Working with Gov.uk, our designers helped them map out these current journeys and identify ways to improve them for users. And service signers help provide vital context around projects so teams can make more informed decisions about their services for users. But when we're collaborating with one team at a time, we need to be as sure as possible we can have a positive impact. So we ran an alpha. This meant trying different ways of working, seeing what worked and what didn't. And it helped us because we were able to rule out certain ways of working and certain moments where we're less effective. Most government services have been around a long time. At some point, something triggers a change to a live service. So to give a few examples, that could be a new policy, it could be the end of a supplier contract, or running costs being too high. And hopefully the team will go away and find out what those problems are with the existing service, test possible solutions, refine the details, and then release these improvements to the public. And with service design, our alpha helped narrow down that window within which we seek to collaborate with teams across government. So this is starting when they're starting to consider changes to a live service, and then right up to kind of defining what problems they're trying to solve. And when teams get this right, we should see this happen. We see a virtuous cycle where services keep on improving. Thank you, Sanjay, to the hard work he's done to kind of illustrate this. And he's thinking about what this means for assessing services as well. You've got to imagine that this is kind of popping out at the page. It just keeps on getting better and better and better. And over the past few months, we've also been looking at the kind of problems that we're solving. Many of the problems that come our way are not service line problems, which takes up some of our time, but we do want to help those users find the right kind of support. So take this, for example. So this came in on Wednesday. someone asking about the feedback banner at the top of services and how do I get that? And we weren't sure how to direct her. I happen to know that this was called the phase banner in the gov.uk design system, but someone was looking for the feedback banner. So I sent them the link to that page, to that component, so they could find that. I also raised a pull request, I believe is the technical term, and asked for them to change this so that you could have an alias so that it now looks like this. So you go to the search bar, you type in feedback banner, which is what they thought it was called, and it comes up with a phase banner. So they found it. So we solved it for that one user, and we solved it for hopefully everyone else. So this came in on Wednesday, problem was solved yesterday. So as well as kind of delivering some help across government and collaborating with teams, we want to help users find what they need from GDS. And improving small things like this should also reduce the time our team spends on dealing with simple requests that aren't service line problems. So what's next? We've narrowed down where service designers can have the greatest impact when collaborating with teams across government. But when we look at what happens when considering change to a service, between then and kind of going away, finding out problems, doing discovery type work, there's a lot going on. So policies, strategies, business cases are being written, suppliers and tools are being procured, and projects are being planned. So we need to further narrow down when we should be collaborating with teams across government. That way, when we're collaborating, we know we're having the greatest impact on government services. But we still have that limitation of working with one team at a time. And at this rate, and given that there are thousands of services across the UK, we won't be able to give every team this vital context around their projects. So in the future, we want to explore how we might give teams across government better context around their around their projects at scale. Thank you very much. Have we got any questions from the audience? I know there's a bit of a delay, so we'll come back to people online. We haven't forgotten about you.
It might be worth to iterate the email address again.
Yes, let me get the email address for people just joining us. The email address for questions is gds-services-week@digital.cabinet-office.gov.uk. Should I read it out twice? That's GDS-services-week. No, pause it up already. GDS-services-week@digital.cabinet-office.gov.uk. It would be somewhat of a miracle if we can get any questions from online. Give it your best. If not, tweet me.
You don't have any question coming in now. Does anyone in the audience have any questions?
Okay, without further ado, I'll step back into host mode. I'd like to introduce the next speakers. So these are two of my favourite content designers working on the service manual team. Give it up for Louise and Joe.
Hi everyone, I'm Louise, this is Joe, and we work on the service manual and guidance for teams around government. As Harry said, we're content designers, and we're going to give you a bit of an introduction to the service manual and our users. We're going to talk a bit about some of the bigger bits of work that we've done over the past year, and we're going to talk about our priorities for the year ahead. So first things first, what's the service manual? We should probably start by explaining that for people who don't know, and talk a bit about who uses it. In short, the service manual is a collection of guidance that helps teams across government build user-focused end-to-end services. It covers everything from service design, user research and technology to accessibility and loads more. And just thinking about who our users are, well, our users are actually lots of different people, and they come in lots of different forms. About a year ago, the user researchers on our team carried out a load of research to figure out who the main user groups are and what they need from the service manual. And they found that we're catering for people with really variable levels of skills and experience, from people who are brand new to service design, maybe new to government and digital even, all the way through to the sort of expert practitioners that we're probably all following on Twitter. And obviously, depending on which group you're in, you have very different needs when you're using the service manual and reading our content. If you're new to service design, you need ways to get up to speed quickly. You need information about your role and what's expected of you, and you need examples showing you how to put things into practice. But if you're an expert, you basically just know how to do all this stuff already, but you might still need the service manual to help you teach and train other people, to bring about culture change in your organization, or to advocate for a particular approach with senior stakeholders. And we know that our content might have to meet all these different needs, which is obviously quite a challenge when we're writing, editing, designing content. One model that we found useful to try and address this is the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition, which is this triangle. It maps out how people progress from doing something for the first time to becoming an all-round expert. People start as a novice, and for those who can't see it, you move through the triangle up through advanced beginner, competent and proficient to expert. We thought this was a pretty good reflection of the spectrum that our users are on when they're when they're designing government services. We know that in the guidance we write, we're going to have to guide beginners along their journey to becoming an expert, as well as giving direction to users who've already got a lot of experience in their particular area. Another thing about this is that people might approach their tasks in different ways depending on where they are in this journey, and that's something that our guidance needs to reflect. So the way we apply this model is to start each piece of guidance with a summary statement or a principle, and then explain the why behind that, explain why that principle is important. That's probably all the detail that a real expert needs, so they can just stop right there, they'll know what they're being asked to do, and they've probably got a good idea of how to do it. For people who are further down in the triangle or new to the topic, understanding the why is a crucial step to mastering things and to eventually becoming an expert, but they can then go on to read our guide in full, to find out what they need to know and find some examples of how other people have approached things to help them get started. And now I'm going to hand over to Joe, who's going to explain a bit more about our guidance.
Thanks, Louise. Yeah, so now Louise has told you a little bit about the service manual and who it's for. I'm going to give you a quick whip through some of the things that we've been working on over the past year. So this first thing, for the benefit of the people on the live stream, is called Researching Contentious Subjects or During Pre-Election Periods. And it's a piece of guidance that we wrote for the user research community. As I'm sure if you work in government, you understand, sometimes you work on things that are sensitive or confidential, or you might be working on a service during a pre-election period and you know that you need to be mindful of the constraints that come along with that. And those aren't always easy environments to do user research in. So we put this bit of guidance together to help teams do research on confidential things in a kind of sensible and safe way, in a manner that will keep their stakeholders happy. Another thing we worked on was this guide, which, as the title suggests, is about collecting personal information from users. Obviously, the introduction of GDPR last year caused quite a lot of anxiety. I'm sure that was felt by some of the people in this room. And this guide is there to help service teams kind of understand some of the principles behind GDPR and apply them in a kind of proportionate way when they're building digital services. This third bit of guidance is one that we worked with an economist on. It's called Measuring the Benefits of Your Service, for those of you who can't see the screen. And as I'm sure you're all aware, government produces services not just to help users do a thing, but to address an underlying policy intent as well. And the aim of this guide is to help you start working out whether your thing is addressing that underlying intent. And one of the ways it does this is by giving teams a kind of rudimentary way of doing economic modeling. And that process allows you to forecast the impact that a particular solution or service would likely have on that underlying intent, which in turn could help you make the case that the solution that you've been set up to build actually wouldn't address that policy intent as well as another way that you might have been prototyping. And secondly, the guidance helps a product manager or service owner make that case using the sort of language that the Treasury are likely to listen to, which is obviously very useful. Okay, so historically in the service manual, we've tended to focus on processes. For instance, we've spent a lot of time and written a lot of guidance telling you that you need to work in an agile way. And that model was appropriate when the manual first launched, because things like agile working were completely brand new to government and people had very little experience working in those ways. But since we first launched the manual a few years ago, digital capability across government has moved on a ton. And Lou pointed out that we probably needed to articulate that actually it's not just about how you build it, but that there are fundamentals that make a service good or bad. So this bit of guidance kind of articulates for the first time what good service design looks like. And it provides people with a few stress tests to help them assess whether the thing they're planning to build is user-focused and well-designed. It's based on a blog post that Lou put together, which obviously means it's great. But it also had contributions from a large number of people across government, which is really important and is something, that we try and build into any bit of guidance that we produce. So the last thing I'm going to talk to you about is this bit of guidance, which we worked on and continue to work on with the accessibility team, who I think are speaking to you next. And we produced it to go alongside the introduction of the new accessibility regulations, which came out or came into force last year, sorry. And it's aimed at all public sector organizations, often people who don't have a real grasp of what accessibility is. They often don't have massive digital capability, and it's designed to help them make their public sector website or app or to design it in a way that meets the regulations. Cool, so that's a little bit about what we've been working on over the past year or so. So I'll quickly take you through a few things that we're planning to work on over the next quarter or so. So these are our priorities for Q4. So we've got BAU guidance, which kind of involves filling in guidance gaps and improving things that members of cross-government communities tell us could be better. We've also got some accessibility guidance to work on, kind of improving what we've already got. And we'll also be improving and adding to our guidance on end-to-end service design, working particularly closely with the service design community and the service communities team here at GDS to improve that. But if you've got any ideas, wherever you are in the world, about what we should be working on, we'd really like to hear from you, because we might have a bit of capacity. I'm trying not to let Stephen's eyes burn into me as I commit us to things that we don't have time for. But yeah, we're really keen to hear from you. And if you would like to get in touch to make a request or give some feedback, or just you want to talk to us about something, you can join this Google group. Unlike Harry, if you work in government, I should have made that clear. I'm not going to read that link out. I've got a Harry commitment. But we'll be sending the slides around, so you can join that if you're working in government, as Stephen said. And that's it from us. No? Cool. Should we wait a second, or how are we doing for time? Nice. I wasn't looking at you, so if you had held up. Sure.
So you had a section about... Good. So you had a section about... sorry, I'm Connor. Hi, I work for the EU Exit team. So you had a section about designing user research during... conducting user research during PERDA, which is obviously a highly sensitive period for any kind of communications that we have with anybody, really. A big issue that people are having in the Brexit space is very similar, in the sense of they're often prevented from conducting user research on sensitive subjects, even if, you know, there's not really an open dialogue about what might be appropriate, or, you know, how they might be able to move that forward, to help move a service forward. I wonder, is there anything in the conducting user research in a pre-election period that could be applicable to this kind of Brexit area as well? Sorry, I realise that's awfully worded. But...
I think what the guidance says is, I mean, it acknowledges that there are some things that just are sensitive. And I think it's about kind of working out which bits of your service are and aren't sensitive, and doing what you can to test the bits that you can test. So there might be particular interactions in your service that you could test in isolation away from that sensitive context, but you could still learn about how users progress through that service. Yeah, that's one example. My memory is a bit hazy on what the actual guidance says. I think there are bits in there, though, that do address the question that you raised. So
okay, all right.
I'll ping you a link.
I'll give it a link.
You can have a
Thank
read.
you.
Thanks. I think we'll hand back over to Harry in that case.
Thank you very much, Louise and Joe. That was really fantastic to hear about what you've been up to and how you're iterating the guidance. So next up, something very close to my heart is something that everyone should know more about, and hope you go away and read about this afterwards on the service manual, perhaps. So we have Tony speaking from the accessibility team. So this is a team looking at particularly web accessibility and how people use services across the UK. So I won't spoil the fun, but Tony, give us a warm welcome.
Thank you. Hello. Hey everyone, thanks for having me. I've been drafted in at the last minute, so do bear with me. Some quick preparation. has had to be done in order for me to be here to do this. But here we are. So I'm Tony Lerner. I work on the accessibility team, and we have been transposing some new regulations into law around accessibility. They're an implementation of an EU directive. For short, we call it the Public Sector Bodies Accessibility Regulations. And you can see from its cover sheet that it was it came into force on the 23rd of September last year, and it refers specifically to websites and mobile apps. According to these regulations, accessibility refers to a set of principles to follow when you're delivering online services and information to make sure people can use them, especially people with disabilities. It's also about ensuring that people with a range of capability, not just fully disabled, but across vision, hearing, mobility, and cognition, don't face any barriers that prevent them from using websites and applications. These principles, apart from being one of the 10 government design principles, are required of public sector bodies. The actual principles are around making your websites perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. They're principles that you can also find in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and they are also included in the European standard as well. So if you're familiar with either one, it will mean that, and you meet either standard, it will mean that your website or app is accessible according to the regulations. The regulations also require public sector bodies to evaluate the accessibility of their websites on a regular basis, fix any issues, and publish the results of that activity in an accessibility statement. There are also some deadlines to meet. New websites need to be compliant by the 23rd of September 2019 this year. Existing websites, old and new, by the 23rd of September next year, and mobile applications by the 23rd of June 2021. GDS will house the monitoring body for the regulations, and that means it will be checking a sample of public sector websites each year. And the enforcement bodies will be the existing enforcement bodies for equalities. That's the Equalities and Human Rights Commission in England, and the Equalities Commission of for Northern Ireland in Northern Ireland. So what have we been working on the team? We've been working with content designers in the service manual team to create guidance to help people understand the regulations and how to meet them. Here's an image of our core guidance that can be found on gov.uk. This has already undergone a number of iterations based on user feedback. We've also updated guidance on gov.uk on how to create and test accessible documents such as PDFs. And we've updated a simple guide to help people understand what the latest version of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is and what it requires people to do. We've also improved guidance on how to test for accessibility, including how to get an accessibility audit. And we've been working hard to promote the new regulations across the public sector, lots of meetings with lots of stakeholders, running workshops, and we've published a series of blog posts, including this one, on how we're helping public sector bodies meet the new regulations. And this one also on accessibility statements. So a quick word on what's coming next. We have a blog post coming up on how we'll ensure compliance with the new regulations. We've been developing an understanding of what the monitoring team will need to do, its size and its shape. We've also been working on a template which public sector bodies will need to use when creating their accessibility statements. We're also helping public sector bodies as much as we can by developing guidance even further to include things like procurement and so on. And on that note, we'd love to hear your feedback on the guidance. So, because we want to make it as useful as possible for you. And that's it from me. Thank you. Any questions?
What's the awareness of the law? Hold that thought. What's the awareness of the law out there in the country?
Right, so we've been promoting the regulations for quite a while. People have known it was coming because it was a directive that was talked about by some stakeholders in the private sector. And because of the intense engagement we've been doing, public sector bodies are now, if we base it on the feedback we've been receiving on the guidance, on the queries we're getting about leading up to compliance, the traffic to the blogs, it's quite high at the moment across central government and across local government. We've been having the fire and police wanting to use our empathy lab and things like that. So it's increasing and it's escalating as we get to that first compliance date of September.
Thanks.
I can currently see there is 146 people watching, or even 148 here. So if anyone do have a question, Lou Down has tweeted the email address, so you can find it there.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. So next up, we have the service communities team. They're going to be talking about some of their work to date and some of their exciting new work as well. So without further ado, let's introduce my former teammates, Katie and Kuba.
Hello, my name's Katie. Oh, Cuba's over there. This is Cuba. And as Harry said, we're going to talk about service communities. So sorry to start on a bit of a bummer, but government has a bit of a problem. It's not structured to meet user needs. So what I mean by that is that users are trying to do things like this. So they're trying to learn how to drive or start a business, but we're not currently making it easy for them to do this. One of the reasons why things aren't easy for users is that they involve lots of government departments. So if you want to start a business, you're going to have to talk to 9 different government departments just to do that. So government departments are structured like this. There are no intersections, no meeting points, just big old silos that have very limited understanding of how they interact. So as a result of this, users end up having a lovely journey that looks like this all over the shop. From our research, we know that civil servants working on this also feel the pain. So from one of our research sessions, we heard that it's so disjointed. No one knows what the other person's doing. It's a problem across government, which means that users aren't getting the right outcomes. It's a problem that we've actually committed to tackling. So in 2020, we said that we would deliver joined up end-to-end services for users. So to help government do that, our team has created service communities, which are networks of people with different skills that work across departments to design and deliver end-to-end services. So what we mean by different skills are, say, designers, policymakers, operation people, so we can have an overview of the services across all channels. And what I mean by end-to-end is from when the user is trying to start doing something, so they have a goal in mind, and to the point where they finish, which can span multiple departments and touch points. So at the moment, we have 4 communities with 236 members, loads of people from more than 15 organizations. To date, they've had 23 workshops. The oldest community is just over a year old, and they can range in size from, say, 50 people to 10, and sometimes they're 10 departments, sometimes they're 2. And these are the 4 we currently have. So we have start a business, employ someone, import, export, and get health benefits. We're in the process of scoping 2 more, and we're hoping to kick off more this quarter. So if you're interested, please get in touch.
And here are some of the things they've been doing. So they've managed to build a common understanding of the service and its users across departments. So for instance, the import-export community have made a service landscape so they can understand what each department does. Communities are removing blockers to communication. So just being in a room together, having a Google group or a Trello makes it easier for people to work together. They're sharing knowledge. So in Companies House, they've opened up weekly research sessions to other departments. And they're reducing duplication. So the pensions regulator didn't have to make somewhere to put some content they had. Instead, they use another department's existing channel, so saving them money having to build their own thing. They're also making the journey on GovUK easier. So for instance, the Employ Someone community has made 2 step-by-steps. We've been speaking to community members to evaluate the approach, and some really good news is that we found that it's working. Yay! So community members acknowledge that they have the same users and that they need to put their users above the department's needs. And now Cuba's going to talk about what we're doing.
Thank you, Katie. So currently our team here at GDS sets up all the communities and helps to facilitate them. And if we want this approach to scale, then we need other people to run their service communities without us having to facilitate every one of them. And that's because GDS we're not really subject matter experts in the areas that all these communities are grouped around. So we're not really the right people to be doing this for every community. So to help us decide how we can go about this problem, we ran a design sprint a couple of months ago around the question of how to reduce the barrier to sustaining a healthy community. And we found that, surprise, surprise, maintaining cross-government collaboration is pretty hard, and civil servants need tools to help them do this and to facilitate this collaboration in a way that's sustainable, so it becomes a part of the day job. So we are trying to help them do this, and to do so we kicked off an alpha called Run a Service Community. It's important to know that we prioritized run over start or join, because we found that at the moment that's the biggest blocker to growing this approach. And in design sprint, we've learned that these are the 2 most pressing needs that we need to meet if we want this to work. So how do we help these facilitators develop their community? What do they need to do at which stage? And what value do they and their communities get from this? What problems are we solving? We need to articulate that better. So we have just finished our first sprint, which was focused on meeting the first need, which was around helping facilitators develop their community. And we did a lot of work analyzing how existing communities have developed. And using this, we then made a prototype, which you can see animating a little bit too quickly behind me. So we had some hypotheses around how kind of a combination of guidance and case studies would help facilitators feel confident in developing their own communities, and it would let them figure out what to do next. And we've used the existing channels of a service manual and a blog to try this out. It went really well. We learned a lot. One person told us that seeing examples is fantastic. If 2 government departments can do it, then so can we, which was great, because that was exactly what we were hoping to hear. We also learned that each community kind of has to start out by understanding their service and their users and getting that shared understanding across departments. And they do this by making service landscapes, sharing knowledge from their departments, and all sorts of other activities. And that's something that we can make pretty good guidance for. We know a lot about that stuff. But as communities mature, we learn that we can't be too prescriptive about what they should focus on, because it's tied quite closely to the nature of their end-to-end services. And again, we're not subject matter experts. So that's why we tried out case studies as a space for communities to share what they did in their instance. So next up, in the next sprint, we're going to try to figure out how to communicate the value of communities. And we're doing a bunch of other stuff as well. So we're going to work with existing communities to try and identify best practice for design of inclusive end-to-end services. And that's because service communities by nature are a very good vehicle for testing this stuff out. So we need to make sure that the communities we built consider more than just the digital bit of their service. We're also going global. So members of our team have recently been in Latvia talking about service communities, and in Chile. And it's really nice to see that other departments face similar challenges and to share those experiences. We published a blog post this week, which is on the GDS blog and outlines what we have been doing, so go read it. And the most recent of news, we run a remote Q&A this morning as a part of Services Week. We've had 10 people dial in asking questions about service communities, and it looks like some of them might start their own, which is great. That's us. Thank you.
So to questions then, if someone wants to start a service community, what did you do and what support can you give them?
So they should email us and we will help them scope that community. We will be able to share them lots of kind of examples of various kind of artifacts that are used to start their own, and we will essentially help them kick it off.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kuba and Katie, and the whole service community team as well. So next up, we've got Martin. Martin's the head of service design here at GDS, and along with the whole of the user-centered design team, has been instrumental in helping put Services Week on, along with everyone across the country. And some of you will be watching now. So put a face to the green posters. Welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Harry. Like I'm not green, not the Hulk. Yeah, I'm going to tell you a bit about what the user-centered design team has been doing in the past month. We're quite a small team. Right now we are like 5 people, and we've been doing a lot of like very diverse things. So overall, what we're working towards are basically 2 things. One is developing user-centered capability across government that makes sure people kind of like start with user needs, they conduct user research, they design and test services, and do this as well across channels to make sure that, well, government services work for all citizens and all users. And then secondly, doing this, importing those parts of government that do not work yet in a user-centered way. And there we start creating new different activities to make sure that this is going to be on track. So here are a few things we're doing overall, kind of like our activities, our service offer, if you like. One core thing is running user-centered design training. This is kind of like the key pillar of our team's effort. Currently, we have 7 different kinds of training, which are run by 3 design experts. But as you can see in this photo, like this is not kind of like a laid-back format. It's highly interactive and quite controversial. We make people put their laptops and their phones away. This sometimes upsets people a bit, but then eventually they always really appreciate that. And right now, as Lou said in the beginning, there's an introduction to service design training taking place right now, and it's a really diverse group of people. There's our design trainer, you can't see remotely, but there's our design trainer, Clara, who was really instrumental in delivering lots of this training. Another really important thing is we're organizing and running community meetups for all the different sub-communities as part of user-centered design. So there's user research, design, service design as a sub thing as well, user research, content design, accessibility. So these events and meetups take place mostly like quarterly. And these are like get-togethers of practitioners, and they're not only happening in London, that's really important, but all across the country. So recently we've been to Manchester and as well to Bristol. So often it's quite a good mix of talks and hands-on workshops, and as well there's time, and this is really important for exchanging experiences with your peers, because sometimes you might be the only interaction designer in Blackpool or in Plymouth, and then or service designer, and then you have to have a conversation with other people who are doing similar things and might have similar challenges. And very importantly, we're raising awareness for the interesting and good work in the civil service by organizing interactive days for students, but also very importantly for career changers to give them a more concrete idea of the type of work that we are doing. And last but not least, we're supporting a growing international group of designers who are working in, for, and with governments I think within more than 55 countries now, which is fairly big and massive. And this is as well for us a way to learn about like what is happening abroad. So in the context of service communities, for example, we learned that quite a similar effort is going on in Taiwan. So it was really interesting to have these exchanges and learn from our peers internationally. So here are some of the things we've been doing in the last 6 to 7 months. As I said, we have overall like 7 different types of training run with 3 trainers. So this includes a designer induction. So if you have been as a designer before, but you weren't with government before, you have just joined government, then this is what you should be doing. Then we have a lot of like introductory training around service design, user-centered design, and as well user research. We have a very popular format. This is the Design Crit Days, so people can bring their work and like get feedback from their peers. We have an introduction to accessibility and a fairly new format as policy and service design, because there's a lot of important overlap. And throughout the entire year, and to be honest, to our own surprise, we trained 1,324 people in 2018. And that is just training. It doesn't include all the community meetups we've been running. So this is a fairly massive number. And in order to scale training to that level, we have to rely on more people. So for example, for the introduction to service design, which is one of our most popular trainings, we've been teaming up with people from the Department for Work and Pensions, from the NHS, and as well from Hackney Council, who have been running this training with us. And it's, again, not just in London, but also Manchester, Newcastle, Blackpool, and Leeds. So we go out. But sometimes you also have to like stop what you're doing. So in autumn, for some of the training, we took a break to really stop and think and evaluate the things we're doing. So some of the training formats have been developed quite a few years ago, and we really had to make sure that it's still relevant to people and responding to their needs. So in this kind of like rediscovery, we partially could and did look at the feedback we already had from training, but kind of like zooming out, looking at the many feedback items we collected over the years. In addition to that, we conducted interviews with people who went on training to understand more about their motivations, their expectations, and also what they have been doing after taking our training. So how useful was all of that? So the 2 main findings from our discovery were, first, there's quite a big variety of skills, experience, and role in our trainees. So when people sign up, they have very different skill sets in the room. And secondly, often it took people kind of like too long to get on a course. So sometimes, or the content wasn't really relevant for them any longer. So if you're joining government, but it takes kind of like half a year to like learn about a certain module overall, or to get a spot because we have long waiting lists, it's really hard for people to like then make good use of that specific training. So through that discovery, we learned way more about our audience and how we then throughout winter now are kind of like differentiating our training, sharpening the value propositions of those. And some of the immediate actions we've been taking was revamping the user research training, making it way more interactive, instead of like too much talking, like people kind of like do and think with their hands. And this is an approach that we've been rolling out throughout the entire training program. Clara also wrote a fabulous blog post about our like very interactive learning approach. You can find it on the design notes, our GDS design blog. We also revamped the design inductions because, as I said, people might join government but then go on this training way too late because there's a long queue. So we made the training much shorter and have now a monthly rhythm where people can join that training. So either if they joined government or just became a designer. And then also one thing that's very dear to our hearts is we started diversity editions for some of the training. We allocated an entire session of the training just for people, for example, with a BAME background, or people with neurodiversity and kind of impairments as well. So we are looking into like making sure that everybody, whatever their background is, whatever their skills, capacities, that they can go on our training. Another thing that came out of that discovery was us kind of fixing, or kind of like first time ever creating a proper onboarding kit. So when people in a user-centered design role like join in that capacity, in the past they didn't really have a very good onboarding experience. So we've been working on a proper starter kit. We have been going through quite a few iterations, as you can see, like a lot of comments and heavy notations there. So overall, this will help people and as well their line managers to better connect with the existing communities, because there are quite a lot of very active communities out there in government, but they have to know about that. They have to know about all the great training offer. And this is something that helps them do that. And another really great highlight of the second half of 2018 was our first ever International Design and Government Conference, which was way bigger than we originally anticipated and expected. At that, we had 220 people from 26 countries, overall representing almost 100 different organizations. So they did join us in London for 2 days of talks and workshops and panel discussions. And some even went on very exciting field trips organized by Transport for London. And we had opening keynotes from 3 different continents representing Europe, Asia, and as well North America. So in the background of this photo, you can see the chief of design from Canada talking. So people really, really loved that. But we are quite a small team. So after the conference, we were asked, hey, do you want to run this again? And we were like, we'd love to. But this international community is now really, really active and strong. It's almost 1,000 people in that community. So then right after the conference, we said, like, we'd love to do it, but maybe someone else wants to do it. So some other governments stepped forward and said that they are very happy to now take on and run events. So we will have some very exciting announcements in the coming weeks. Apart from our international things at home, we are doing as well very important things, and most importantly, targeting new audiences for our training. So creating dedicated training for senior civil servants, introducing more senior civil servants to user-centered design, and as well the policy profession and the operational and delivery profession. So for the training today that we're running, we allocated specific tickets just for these people. For policy people and as well operational people, because sometimes they don't have the same networks, so they will find out about this training only later, and then most of the spots are gone. So investing more in training for these people. And yeah, as we are a tiny bit exhausted after services week, we're at the same time super excited. And I love seeing, like, I think more than 40 or maybe even 50 different activities all across the country. So we now plan to extract some of the formats we've been running throughout the week. One specific thing is remote case studies. So we want to have these case studies for people working in the civil service, wherever they are, so they can dial in every month to listen to one great service case study to really understand what good user-centered design looks like. Questions?
So you might have seen it pop up on screen, but I'm just going to put that email up there again. gds-hyphen-services-week@digital.cabinet-office.gov.uk. Please do your questions. Have we got any questions from the audience in the room? No, we're pretty up to date on the Services Week stuff. Anything online? No, quiet bunch.
We still have maybe some cool Services Week stickers. I'm gonna hand them out to the people in the space here, and we're gonna put them up, I think, as well on GitHub. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Martin. So you got a little sneak peek of the gov.uk design system earlier, but Tim is here to tell you a lot more about that. So this went live, like summer last year? It went live at the last one of these, so that's amazing. So Tim's going to tell you all about what they've been up to since then. Give a warm welcome to Tim.
Thanks, everyone. So yeah, thanks, Harry. I'm Tim. I'm head of interaction design here at GDS, but also product manager for the design system. So we're a multidisciplinary team of about 11 people. And as I said, we went into public beta just over 6 months ago at the last one of these. And this is our mission. We want to help people to effectively design and build usable, accessible services. And we've got 3 products that we use and deliver to help people do that. So we've got the design system itself, which is a collection of guidance and coded examples that people can follow. We've got the prototype kit, which is a tool for rapidly developing HTML prototypes that uses the design system. And then underpinning both of those things, we've got GovUK Frontend, which is a front-end library of code, CSS, JavaScript, HTML, that kind of stuff. If you want to go and look at them, you can go to that URL, govuk/design-system. And if you go there, this is what you'll see. So this is the homepage. And if you have a look around, you're going to see things like this. So we've got really basic things like how to code and style a link, but we've got kind of slightly more complex things like how to create an error summary on a forms page, and then slightly more complex things like how to ask people for their names. And we've got about 40 or 50 of these components and patterns at the moment, and the number grows every month. Everything comes with coded examples, as I said, and also guidance for appropriate use. So you can see when to use a thing, when not to use a thing, and how to use a thing. We also have an open backlog, which shows all our work in progress and lets the community of designers and developers discuss these things and offer to contribute them as well. And as I said, we launched the last Open Show and Tell in July 2018, and since then we've been busy iterating the products and getting more things published. So I'm going to talk for a little bit about that for the next, over the last 6 months. I can't cover it all, so I'm going to have to do some highlights, I'm afraid. So probably the biggest thing that we rolled out initially, Harry's already kind of demoed this, was search. So this was a thing that we knew people wanted, but we waited until after we'd gone public to launch it. So the search is really nice. It's based on our accessible autocomplete, which means you can start typing and then just immediately hit return on the thing you want, and you'll go straight to that page without having to go via a results page or anything like that. We've made a few other platform improvements as well. So we've added secondary navigation. We've fixed up the layout to make it work better on tablets and so on. We've also been looking at the accessibility of the things inside the design system. So one example of this is that we've been looking at making sure that the pages behave sensibly when people invert or otherwise change their colors. And this is really good for people who have visual impairments and want to change the colors of their screen. Another accessibility improvement is this one. So that some people we know like to enlarge the text on websites on their mobile devices, at least the ones that support that. So when we launched the design system, that's what would happen when you tried to do that. After a couple of months, we fixed it, and now it does this. So these are kind of small examples of the constant iterations and improvements we've been making over the last 6 months based on user feedback and research and so on. And it's starting to have an effect. So we're getting nice feedback from our users. This is a developer on GovUK Pay. So Pay adopted GovUK Frontend about 4 months ago, I think, and it's had a really good effect on their performance. It's sped up the page load times rapidly. And that's largely a result of the fact that they were able to remove an awful lot of code from their front end. So 1,400 lines of code, load of CSS gone, and loads of JavaScript. So there are real performance benefits in adopting this stuff. This is another nice quote from the NHS. So when they started to build their own design system, they basically forked ours and used it as the starting point for their own. And they think that this probably saved them a couple of years worth of effort, and also just gave them the permission to do this kind of work in the first place. So that was nice to hear back from them about that. So as well as making platform improvements, we've also been publishing new and improved components and patterns. So I'll give you a few examples of those. We've got things like accordions. We've got an accessible character count component. We've got tabs, payment card details. We've got a page of guidance about adopting step-by-step navigation, and also one about creating pages for when your service is unavailable. And there are quite a few more of those. This is the full list of things that got published in the last 6 months. And what's really nice about this is that everything but the last 3 was actually an external contribution. So this was something that was contributed with our support by people outside of the team. And in generally, we've had an incredible amount of commitment from our external community of contributors. So we've had over 100 commits to our code base from the community, and we've had 550 plus comments on the community backlog. So people are really engaging with this thing and helping us out. And that's very important to us. We can't scale the design system without all of this external contribution. So we've been working really hard in the last 6 months to improve that. So supporting contribution is actually quite difficult, and we've been refining our processes and documenting everything so that the team can do it really well. We made some stickers recently. A more recent example of how we are trying to lower the barrier to entry for contribution. On Monday, as part of Services Week, we ran 2 workshops to basically train content designers how to use GitHub to make contributions to the design system, so suggesting changes to content and so on. And this is all part of our effort to lower the barrier to entry, so it's not just developers who can do this stuff. We've also been changing and improving the way that we support users as well as contributors, so small things and big things. So for example, just changing the way that we tag support tickets to make it more consistent so that we can do triage more effectively, so we can spot common problems that people are having and making improvements. And that kind of stuff has enabled us to answer 530 support tickets in the last 6 months, at least. So that's about 100 a month, I think, that we've been doing via Zendesk, Slack, and GitHub. And all of this has helped drive adoption and uptake of the design system. So this is a graph of our traffic over the last 6 months, and you can see that over the last 6 months, the design system itself has grown its audience by about 50%, I think, and over the same period, the legacy product, GovUK Elements, has shrunk by a similar amount. So this is a really good sign to us that we're shifting people away from our old products and onto our new ones. Generally, this is how well we're doing in terms of usage. So we've had over 50,000 visits to the design system. I think that's from about 150 different countries. So there's definitely kind of international interest in this work. We've had over 1,000 downloads of the kit, and there are at least 400 odd repos on GitHub which are using GovUK frontend now. So that's, again, a really good sign that this thing is being used. Okay, so some of the stuff we're going to be working on next. We ran 2 discoveries last quarter. One was into understanding more about how teams prototype in government, and then the second one was understanding how they use other design resources, so departmental design systems and so on. And we learned a lot from those 2 discoveries, and off the back of that, we've built all that work into our roadmap for the next 12 months. So I'm going to talk about the next 3 months now. So this is what we're planning to do in the next 3 months, some of the things anyway. So we're going to continue to support our users and contributors and iterate that process and make things more streamlined and efficient for them. We know from the prototype kit discovery that we've got lots of improvements we need to make to our documentation there, so we're going to do that, and also our documentation about how to migrate to the design system. And then perhaps most importantly, we've got to make sure that people using the design system can use it to make their services GDPR and WCAG 2.1 compliant. So I think, as was mentioned earlier, any new service has to, by September this year, be compliant with WCAG 2.1 AA. So we're doing a lot of work this quarter to make sure that if they use GovUK frontend, if they use the design system, that it's going to help them to do that. So that's us for the next 3 months. And that's the URL. If you want to get involved in any way, just go there and go to the community section. You'll find out how you can get involved, make contributions, give feedback, and so on. So thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Does anyone have any questions? No? Then I'm going to hand over to Harry, I think.
Thank you so much, Tim. That was fascinating to see how many people are getting involved in the design system. So next up, we have parts of our common components at GDS. So these are bits of technology that anyone in government in the UK can adopt and use as part of their service. And Asha is here to tell us about Gov.UK Pay.
Cool. Thank you very much, Harry. So I've been given this after Katie and Miriam decided to pull out of this at the last minute. So this should hopefully be quite a good presentation because Katie's wrote it. We get called lots of different things for Gov.UK Pay. It's GovPay, PayGov. We don't particularly care what it's called, as long as people start using it. And we are seeing it now become kind of a option for the whole UK public sector. So we focus quite a lot on central government departments over the years, but we're now seeing a rollout across local authorities, NHS and the police. What used to happen was the departments would have their own integrations, their own payments providers. some departments would have multiple payment providers and multiple integrations. You would go onto a government department and you might go to a Barclays payment page, and in the same department you might go to a WorldPay page. What Gov.uk Pay has done is brought that all back under one roof. So all departments come in and they have the option to range of credit and debit cards payments. We've got new suppliers that help them on board quicker. We're going to have direct debits and e-wallets coming quite soon. Pay is PCI DSS compliant, so it's got the highest level of compliance for credit card payments available. So it's a safe environment to take money on. It's a super easy integration. Just yesterday, we had a catch up with the Met Police who have just onboarded. Their team love it. They've always, one of the comments was they've never found making refunds to users so easy. So it's a super simple way to integrate, and users, both the citizen and the teams, love it at the other end. So here's some of the big stats. We've now taken over £100 million worth of payments via Pay. We are growing fast. So last year there were 10 services. As of this morning, 78 are live. There's another batch coming live next week. So another 10 FCO services are coming live. A range of blue badge services for local authorities as well. It's across 31 organisations. And as I said, we're growing beyond central government. So NHS use us. All police forces are looking to use over the next couple of months. And local authorities are onboarding at a rate of knots. Government departments use us in a big way. So the Home Office have agreed now to use us for payments for passports. So hopefully that will be coming live in the next few months. Foreign and Commonwealth Office are rolling this out to 234 embassies and consulates around the world for emergency travel documents. So it's a real kind of growing service. We've got some really interesting partners in the pipeline. NHS business support are coming online. So when people start having to pay for NHS services, for particular NHS services that you need to pay for, like dental, you'll be using Pay as the way to pay. DVLA are coming on soon. All police forces and local authorities through Blue Badge. So what have we done in the last 6 months? So we're taking the time and cost out of procurement. We offer our own contract now for card payments and direct debits. So we're using two of the kind of biggest and brightest fintechs out there, Stripe for credit card integration and Go Cardless for direct debits, making it super simple for people to take payments instead of having to go through the huge hassle of procuring their own payment service provider. We cater to teams without any technical expertise. You can take payments via Gov.uk Pay straight away. So through a system called Payment Links, you don't have to do any kind of technical integration. You can set up one payment link on Gov.uk and you can take payments directly through that. This is really, really useful for teams that are taking payments for things like events, who don't want to have to build a big integration. This is really interesting, for example, to schools who just want to take payments for £3 or £4 from parents for school activities. So it's kind of making Pay more and more accessible to more and more people. And we're kind of matching up to people like WorldPay and Barclays. So with ability to surcharge for business cards, delay capture. So instead of taking the money straight away from someone's account, we can hold on to it for a couple of days until the service is ready to be taken. And we're doing things like Welsh language payments. So the Welsh government are really keen on Pay. They're really interested in using us, but we need to have a multilingual solution. And Welsh payment pages are going live. And we're talking to people in Northern Ireland about kind of how we deal with kind of issues around Ireland as well. And performance. So as we take on bigger and better organizations, we need to be able to scale and cope with that. So we've now got Pay to a level where it can deal with 40 transactions per second. And some really interesting stuff coming in the next 3 months as well. So we're making it easier to start taking payments. So with the Stripe integration, if you've got no payment service provider, you can log into Pay. You can have a Stripe account set up within about 5 minutes. Stripe will do, for example, all the anti-money laundering checks that you need to have done. And we'll do some checks to make sure you're a public sector organization. But you can have a payment account up and running within 5 to 10 minutes. We're expanding the payment types. So direct debit is now our new big thing. We're going to have a private beta running over the next 3 months. And that's really interesting for local authorities as they look to kind of how they can collect money. For example, as their capita contracts come to an end, what can we do around supporting them for stuff like council tax and other services? We're working really closely with MHCLG, trying to work out how do we get Pay to integrate into how local authorities work. We're really good at kind of linking into how government's payments, finance systems work, but local government has a particular way of doing its finance. And so how do we integrate pay through metadata into income management systems in local authorities? And we're going to improve the user experience by turning on Apple Pay and Google Pay in the next few weeks. 28% of people who use gov.uk pay do it through an iOS device and use Safari. So if we can make the friction for them to pay less by using stuff like Apple Pay, we'll have that kind of up and running for them as soon as possible. And I think that's me. Any questions?
Have we got any questions in the audience? Thank you very much, Sasha. So next up, this is quite a daunting subject for a lot of people. So this is how to check identity of people using your service. And it's quite an interesting one because if you're checking someone's identity, sometimes these checks can be quite intense and some people won't be able to get through them. So it's really important that when designing services, we only ask users to provide the right identity checks like as necessary. Lawrence is going to tell us all about the work that his team's been doing to make this really easy for services to make the right decisions. Thanks, Lawrence.
Cool. So I'm from the ISF team, Identity Standards and Fraud. We work mostly on creating standards for security checking identities in the private and public sector. First, I'm going to talk about the fraud bit, so you know kind of why it matters. So we're working on some standards, and the idea is that by following these standards and doing the right types of checks, most of my presentation isn't this goofy. By following our standards, will reduce the chance of your service being kind of attacked by stolen identities and identities that have been created out of thin air. So the scale is significant. It's definitely a thing, and it's probably affected like loads of us here. These are the kind of things people normally think about when they think about identity fraud. So what have we got? We've got like ordering goods in your name, taking out phone contracts. That's happened to me. It's right pain. And some of these numbers are from English language markets across the dark web. And there's like significant multipliers across different markets as well. So there's a wide range of motivations for why people need identities and want to take fake identities. So I'm just going to read one of these out. So yeah, I'm looking to buy a Canadian identity, female to be exact. I'm a Canadian myself, so not looking to gain illegal access, just looking to change my identity and credit score. So yeah, I don't know. Why do you think someone might, what do you think someone might do when they've got this piece of information? Does anyone have any ideas? Get a mortgage. Maybe get a mortgage, yeah. Yeah, so like maybe they're getting an address or something. This kind of document is probably going to be like a birth certificate or a passport. Kind of call that a breeder document because you can, using that piece of information, you can get access to other documents, or you could get an address. So once you've got an address, you can probably gain access to other services as well. And maybe this isn't even the person, maybe they're not really getting it for themselves. Maybe someone's been trafficked into Canada and they need an identity for that person. And maybe they will start claiming benefits for that person, but they probably won't see the money. So impersonators, so some of my slides are goofy. We're seeing a growth in synthetic identities and impersonators. So services need to have thorough checks to identify them. And criminals will sell all sorts of documents, so like driving licenses, passports, etc. So here you can see, this is the process on one of their marketplaces. So like, after buying an ID or passport, come to us and we'll find some like corresponding data sets. Or alternatively, come to us with a data set and we'll find an identity to match that. So yeah, they often get this information from leaks, so things from credit bureaus and things like that. How do we stop that? We mitigate the risk by feeding this intelligence into the standards that we're creating. And yeah, here's another example. You can see like there's one-stop shops for like utility statements, payrolls, fake driving licenses. We know they're available, so we try and exclude them from what makes a good identity check. Cool. And putting together multiple pieces of identity evidence builds up to a credible identity. And just to bring it back to why we really care, fake identities allow people to commit really nasty crimes and things like this without being caught. So financial fraud, people trafficking, migrant smuggling. We see some of this stuff and we report it to the right authorities. So what makes up a good identity check? There's basically 5 elements. So using the 5 elements, you can prove a user is who they say they are. You can use you can go deeper into each of these elements to like be more sure or more confident on an identity. But you generally put them together and you can get a picture that that person is who they say they are. So a strong piece of evidence, so like a passport, maybe that's quite strong, depends what country it's from. You could, and then how do you check that passport is secure? So there's no point collecting a strong piece of evidence if you're not going to do a strong check against it. Or you could collect 5 weak pieces of evidence and do like a weaker check. It really depends on your users and what kind of evidence they can supply to you. Verification is another step. So how do you match that person with the information they're giving to you? Do you do like a selfie check? That's quite low, like a weak check, or do you have them come into a post office or into a government office? Have they been at risk of fraud? Do you check the databases and has their name popped up? If they're high risk of fraud, do you try and give them access to a service in another way? And activity, has that identity been active over time? So that's where you might be asked to give access to a credit check or other piece of information. So like in local government, the council might be able to show that you've had council tax and you've like been paying that over time and things like that. So what are we doing? We're publishing new standards and guidance. Yeah, the current guidance isn't written in a kind of user-friendly and structured way. It's hard, and it's kind of hard to balance security and a user-friendly service when standards aren't clear. It's kind of impossible. So we've been pairing with subject matter experts. We're a user-centered design team, and we've been doing a ton of user research. So with identity risk advisors on teams, service teams, private companies, suppliers, and even end users. Because you might be buying a thing, you might be building your own thing to check an identity. So we're going to be publishing this new guidance soon. But along with the guidance, we're kind of developing a set of tools to help kind of meet that guidance and follow it, because even with well-written guidance, there's a lot of it, and it's hard to work out how strong your current checks are and how you can make them stronger. So we're kind of looking at these tools at the moment separately, but we're also looking at what that end-to-end user journey might look like if you're building an identity checking service or process. So yeah, here's one of our tools. You might tell us about your checks, and we'll tell you how strong it is against these elements. So like, what's your chance of your the identity being stolen or them using fake evidence? And then we go on to give them recommendations. We've also started a bit of a community. We've been running workshops. We ran one for Services Week yesterday. So if you're kind of doing a discovery, or you've got ID checking process, or you're just interested, join the Slack channel on Cross Government. We've also got a mailing list, but I didn't put it on here. But you can contact me if you want. Cool.
Thanks, Lawrence. Does anyone have any questions?
Hello.
Hey.
Have you done any thinking about digital signatures?
I'm not sure about digital signatures at the moment. I guess you'd need to prove that you are the person signing. So as soon as you've proved your identity, you could just press a button. So I guess with something like Verify or something you built, as long as we believe you are who you say you are. There's a lot of work going on with like business focused services at the moment. They're trying to kind of solve that as well, but I don't really know.
Maybe we could have a chat afterwards.
Yeah, that would be cool. Lou.
What are you doing to make sure that services are not creating a kind of overly barrier to people using their service? Because obviously you're keeping people who shouldn't be in the service out, but occasionally if you don't have 10 pieces of documentation because you moved house, 3 times in the last 4 months, or, someone's stolen your documentation, or, there's lots of reasons why people won't be able to prove it. So yeah. Just a question.
So the idea is, rather than, so you haven't got a service there, you're going through and it asks you for a credit check when you haven't built up a credit history, and you fail and you can't access the service. We're hoping that people can design the service using evidence that their users actually have. So try and consider what that might be. So we haven't set what evidence you have to use. We've just created a framework where you can kind of assess any kind of evidence, see if it would work. But yeah, it's really hard.
It would be interesting to have a conversation probably with the kind of team looking at assisted digital and kind of user support around what types of documentation different people have, just to kind of maybe provide a bit of guidance on, the types of documentation that are possibly the most difficult to get hold of for people. Just a thought.
Yeah, so I think there's groups as well doing that, so we just need to be connected with them.
Anyone else have a question? No? Hand over to Harry.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. So that concludes the kind of team show and tells. So I hope you all enjoyed those. We don't know how successful the kind of questions have been. I don't know if anyone actually was able to tell us where they were dialing in from. Maybe tweet us using hashtag Services Week, and we can find out that way. And we'll probably also keep that email open. We'll have a look and see if we can get back to any questions. And I believe Lou is going to give us a final wrap up and some closing remarks for Services Week. Give it up for Lou.
Thanks, Harry. So firstly, thank you to Harry for being such an excellent compere. Usually it's me sort of darting in, trying to say something insightful and then darting off again, but we've had jokes, we've had everything. It's brilliant. So yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone across government who has been part of Services Week this week. It's been incredible watching the hashtag on Twitter and watching all of the events and training and workshops you've done. They've all been absolutely brilliant. Particularly loving all the photographs coming in at the moment of people watching in Plymouth in the land registry. Hi, team down there, who've been watching remotely. Some people have got rooms booked in different departments. That's been amazing watching all this sort of stuff. And I hope you found it useful. I hope you have learned some stuff about what we're doing here at GDS to help the rest of government to build better services. I hope you've learned some really exciting, interesting case studies and some new skills maybe. And yes, we'll be doing it next year. And if you have ideas about how to make that better, you can try using the email that I think very few people have managed to use. I think possibly a tip for next year is we might be having a better way of asking questions. And thank you to Martin and the team who have been organising Services Week, because they have been absolutely incredible pulling all of this together, including changing their own avatars on their various Google devices so that their pictures come up with Services Week as well. So a huge kind of round of applause to them, the contributors and everyone. Thank you.